We're here today talking with Ed Morrison, who is a policy analyst with the Purdue University Center for Regional Development. And we're going to ask him a few questions about open source economic development. And Ed, can you tell us why that is the model of the future for economic development?
Well, primarily because the old models, the traditional models, the hierarchical models, don't work very well. We do economic development, workforce development, education really, in these open civic networks. Happens outside the four walls of any one organization. So we've got to learn how to think together, how to act together in these new ways to do complex projects. We've got to do these complex projects together.
And Ed, what's the role of education in this? Do they have a role in the future economy?
Yeah, education is the core of the new economy. So part of the challenge, of course, is to build this brain power. And it's not just our K through 12 systems. It's a pre-K system. It's a post-secondary system. It's the integration all along that line, that continuum, and then into adult education, constantly reskilling, constantly upskilling our abilities to compete.
And how do employers fit into the equation?
The employers have to play a vital role as well. They have to start thinking about what it is they need. Most employers can give you detailed specifications on the products that they have. They can give you very detailed specifications, but they can't give you detailed specifications on the type of skills that they need. So employers have to step up and start working with education and the parents to identify exactly what are the skills that are emerging that we need to prepare for.
If I were an elected official, whether it was at the county level or municipality, what should I be thinking about? What could I learn from my peers across the country?
Well, the successful political leadership will start to cross boundaries. We'll start to look at the fact that the challenges that we face, economic education challenges we face, don't stop at the county line. These are, in fact, regional challenges. They cross the state lines, they cross the county lines, they cross organizational boundaries. So effective political leadership is going to come from the ability to make those kinds of connections. Learning from other regions that are doing this is primarily the best way for a political leader to catch up and to really lead the pack.
But if I'm a local elected official and I have my own constituents to be concerned about, is there any risk in me looking outside of my boundary?
No, not really, because, again, part of the advantage of building prosperity and building tax base will come from building connections across these boundaries. Wealth is being created across political boundaries. Wealth is being created through networks. So if we're trying to make sure that our community succeeds, our citizens succeed, we have to foster that ability to connect across those boundaries. These are boundaries, again, remember, these are boundaries that are largely defined 100, 200 years ago. So they're arbitrary boundaries in many respects. And in the global economy, those boundaries don't matter as much as they did in the past.
And I've heard you talk in the past about the finding new pathways, that the road to prosperity isn't necessarily going to be paved and well-traveled. Can you talk a little bit more about that, what that looks like?
Well, part of the challenge we have is how do we connect the assets that we've built in our industrial economy to the opportunities we have in our network economy? How do we make those connections? That's not an easy question. There are no pathways that have been established, marked out. These are more game trails. We have to find them. We have to look and explore. So we have to launch a lot of experiments. We have to launch a lot of ideas, find out which ones work, and then quickly scale those up. So, for example, you have an initiative that is successfully engaging 20 kids in a manufacturing summer camp. Well, how do we make that 200? How do we make that 500? How do we make that 1,000? Those are the relevant questions that we have to start asking ourselves.
Do you think that a lot of our ability to do this is dependent on new funding and cash infusion, or can this be done with what we have?
Well, there will be new cash funding with the stimulus package, that's sure, but the key element of network-based approaches is to link and leverage assets across organizations and political boundaries. When you do that, and when you get a shared sense of purpose, a shared sense of outcomes, what happens is effectively you increase productivity by factors of 2, 3, 5. So we're not really looking for the 10% 12%, 15% improvement. We're looking for the magnitude improvements, the 10x improvements, the 5x improvements, the 3x improvements. Where can we find these transformational improvements? And that's going to come from collaborations and productivity improvements that are going to come from these partnerships, these mutually reinforcing partnerships.
Now that sounds interesting, but is there any risk if I just wait and see? I mean, if I wait a few more years, because there's a lot going on, and if I wait a couple years, am I going to lose out at all?
Well, the option of waiting really isn't very much of an option, because this is a fast-moving environment. It's a fast-moving economy. These new approaches to creating wealth are quickly evolving, not only in our country, but across the world. And people are learning about these new models by actually doing. They learn by doing. So not doing essentially is a vote for not learning. So as you don't do anything, you end up not learning, and so you fall farther and farther behind. So I would argue that not doing anything, waiting, rather than engaging and working collaboratively across these boundaries and learning how these partnerships can work and how these networks work, is really the way to go. You can start small, relatively low risk, focus on those initiatives that make sense, put the shower curtain on the inside of the bathtub. Those kinds of initiatives make a lot of sense. But sitting pat, waiting, probably isn't a good strategy.
Good. Well, thank you for your time today. And I'm Mike Mortel with the Regional Workforce Alliance.